Hey everybody, so I'm back with another review, and this time we're going to be finishing up Dennis O'Neil's Iron Man by talking about issues 193 to 208. This represents the last chunk of his run, and at this point Denny O'Neil's been writing it for about 50 issues, and after this we'd get a few filler stuff up to 215, which is when Michelini and Layton return, and we'll cover that next time. And it's been no secret that in both the previous videos where I talk about this, I keep raving about just how well it's handled, and all the little intricacies, and all the big complex motions and human ideas and experiences that O'Neil was able to capture so perfectly. And by the end of this run, that's still absolutely true. I don't want to speak in hyperbole. I don't want to sound like I'm just spouting hollow words and not giving a critical enough look at this run. But I can't think of any better way to discuss this than simply saying Dennis O'Neil's Iron Man is pretty damn close to a masterpiece. It's one of the best runs I've ever read, and it's certainly going to be quickly added to my list of the best things Marvel's ever produced, and the thing I'm going to reread as often as I can. Even Michelini and Layton's run, which was good, it was more about creating the foundation and giving people something to work with in terms of what made Iron Man important. The way Denny O'Neil runs with this here is just uncanny. It's so well done. And a lot of that just comes from sitting down and reading it and getting all the little nuances. Because what O'Neil's able to do is take this campy format and take this campier time of writing and turn it into something a little bit more human and a little bit more, I don't want to say DC, but something more about the ideas. Because the big difference between Marvel and DC in comics, at least up to this point, is that most of, if not all of DC's characters are about the big, grand, abstract concepts, and those work to varying degrees. Like, for example, Batman and Superman work really well when you think about their interpretations of justice, their ideas about how to deal with fear and intimidation and things like that. And you go to characters like Green Lantern that have this abstract notion of the will that they never really define, but more or less it's always about that. You go to Wonder Woman and it's always about truth. Superman a lot of times is about discovery, and Green Lantern's got a bit of the discovery thing in him too. So you get these big, huge notions that we want to live up to, and the characters embody them, and we follow them on their journey of understanding these ideas and working to make them habitual in people, and giving us something to strive towards. On the other hand, the Marvel characters are the ones that make mistakes, are the ones that represent us, and represent the imperfections first. So we look up to Captain America and Iron Man and Daredevil, not because they give us this big overarching theme or philosophical worldview of this is what right is and I am the embodiment of this school of thought, but more of I can understand where these guys have gone wrong, and I see the lesson at the end of the day is to move past the mistakes or learn from these mistakes. And it's always more about relating to them as people and then allowing that to move forward, as opposed to giving us an idea and giving us incentive to move forward in that direction. And both are very valid interpretations, and both are completely fine. And DC and Marvel have their mix. For example, in the Marvel universe, in the cinematic universe particularly, Captain America is more like DC Superman, but then you go over to the DC universe and characters like Tim Drake and even to some extent characters like The Question are more along the Marvel side, and it's a mix and match thing. These are just kind of broad definitions, the big divides. So Denny O'Neil's able to strike this really strange balance with Iron Man, where we get this big notion of what justice is and what the right thing to do is. And throughout most of this run, up until about 193 to about 200, it's all about people pushing Tony Stark to accept this notion of justice, of it doesn't matter what happened to you, move past it, get over it, figure out that your actions have consequences, but so do your inactions, and trying to push Tony to be more like Superman, to be more like Captain America, and Tony just can't do it. Tony's not built that way, and Rhodey isn't either, and Rhodey as Iron Man gets caught up in the very human thing of, I don't want this power taken away from me, of my life didn't have meaning, and I was always kind of lost, and I was always just looking for the next big thing, and how do you get bigger than being Iron Man? And the fear of losing the thing that makes you feel like you have any self-worth is also not only what incentivizes you to survive and to keep going, but also what could very easily destroy you. And Rhodey understands this and still has this notion of justice, and still at times feels like it's obligatory to be a good person. And he relishes in that at the cost of sometimes his own personal sanity in this run, and his own personal health in this run. Tony, on the other hand, isn't ready to make that sacrifice. He doesn't trust in himself. He doesn't, in a lot of ways, he doesn't understand himself, and he's coming to an understanding, and he thinks the armor hinders that too much. And the greater thing about it is, Tony's very much what most people are when they try to be introspective. They try to dissect what makes them tick. So they ascribe their failures to a singular mistake. And then they dissect this singular mistake to think, well, the mistake was really caused by this other thing. But this other thing was attached to this other thing. And this other thing goes back to this other thing. And you kind of loop around, and introspection, a lot of times for people, can become this endless loop of self-doubt and self-deprecation. And that's sort of what Tony's stuck in. He's in that vicious circle where he thinks everything about his past makes him a terrible person. And he's having a really hard time seeing the light. And the only light he really sees is that there's a thrill to wearing the armor. And then even then, he thinks of things like, well, the thrill isn't ultimately worth it, or the thrill is more harmful than it is good, and he can't really bring himself to think about things as much as on the realm of justice, as much as he can just think of, let's be forgiving, let's move on, let's merely live for a better notion of self-help. Let's completely forget about all these societal obligations, and let's just try and figure out what we did wrong and keep going from there. That everyone has a sense of self-responsibility, and that's all we should go to. And it's in some ways a good idea, in some ways it's not so much of a good idea. Because Tony's at least learning to fix his mistakes. Tony's at least learning to be a better person. And he's at least learning the things about his past that have hurt him. But at the same time, he's letting that consume him too much. And at this point, I'm kind of just like rambling on and on about about Tony's psychology, but it's really fascinating and it's really well done, and it makes you sympathize with this character far more. So in this part of the story, the scientist kid that was helping Rhodey understand Tony's armor, what's his name? It started with an M, Mulray or something like that. He dies because of Obadiah Stane, and Stane has been trying to systematically make sure he makes Tony Stark's defeat permanent, and he does this by starting to kidnap some of Tony's old friends and allies, like Pepper Potts and Happy Hogan, Miss Abergast, his security chief, everybody. He's trying to destroy Stark as a person more than he has before, and we get inside Stane's past and learn that part of his issue is that he thinks of life as a game, and his sole purpose tends to be winning that game at all costs, whether it's cheating or manipulation or whatever. And all that comes from the fact that his father played a game in front of him and died. He played Russian roulette, and the first bullet died. And he gets into this psychosis, and he becomes fixated on moving past that defeat and knowing that you should never be a loser. And that's what he wants to make Tony Stark. He wants to obliterate him. And it's a really twisted way to look at things. And Stane is handled with a lot of nuance, because it's not about a revenge game. It's not about one wrong thing completely setting him off. It's about a series of things, and it's about growing up without the self-reflection, without the right kind of self-reflection, the kind that Tony has, where it's just a vicious circle, and you realize that there's not a lot separating these two men. So Tony, reluctantly, after his friend dies and everyone blames him for his friends being kidnapped, and realizing that if you just put on the armor sooner, you could have stopped Stane, and in the most defeatist way possible, Tony decides, fine, I will be Iron Man again. And he decides to put on his new suit. Up to this point, we've had the silver armor, the golden armor, the classic red and gold, the Secret Wars armor, the stealth armor, and the space armor. And at least I think that's all of them. And now Dennis O'Neil creates the Silver Centurion armor. And aesthetically, it's not an armor I ever really liked. It's not something that I ever completely cared for. And I know there's a big divide there, where some fans think he's awesome, or think this armor's awesome. Some fans think it's terrible. I'll go and say right now, in context of the story, the armor is fantastic. And part of why I say that is there's a very deliberate color symbolism being played up here. The old armor was a mix of red and yellow. The red obviously being kind of an angry, jump, don't ask questions, don't look before you leap kind of color. And then the yellow being fear, the yellow being lack of courage. So there's this mix of anger and fear and misunderstanding, and that is Tony's hero arcs were always kind of sampled and skewed by those two emotions and those two colors. So now that he's kind of realized what he's afraid of and realized the problems in his life, even if he's not perfectly mentally healthy, he still realizes that he can be healthy and he should be getting healthy. You lose the yellow and you get the silver, and the color symbolism now becomes a much more calm, or a much more blank slate. So he's lacking the fear completely. At the same time, he's lacking a lot of human experience with that color, but he still has the anger. And you see in certain lines where he says, I'm angry that I'm afraid, and I'm angry that I lost. And he's much more understanding of his emotions and less less afraid of them. He's less he's less insecure about all these things, and he's just facing them all head on. And I love the Silver Centurion armor in that context, that now that he's moved past this one mistake, he loses a color, and it's a color that improves him on a psychological and human level. Now, I know that as time goes on, the armors would become less thematically and emotionally tied, and that's fine. But I think it's really cool that here Dennis O'Neil makes a really good point of why the Silver Centurion armor and why the red and gold armor are different, and it totally works in that context. Stane also gets the Iron Monger armor here, which is cool, and it's a really great fight that those two have. And Stane's ultimate end is completely within his character. And you can even go back through this run and see how everything kind of led to this outcome if Stane didn't win. And it's sort of his last way of saying, I still didn't lose, even if you win. And that's really cool. The only other thing I can think of to mention is that Tony gets his new business going here, where he decides to get a bunch of investors in to create a space station. And the space station would help people expand out in the universe, and it's again more symbolism about the age of exploration, about the simplicity of humanity and getting away from the capitalist, completely wrapped up in your own world structure, and broadening your scope to realize that you're just on a tiny planet in a immensely incomprehensible sized universe, and looking outwards in baby steps the best thing you can do and the best way to move forward. And that's a really great way to end it off, and to end the run with the final issue 208, Tony being on his station just looking out the window into space, and seeing all of these stars in the universe, and that this one journey ends, but on an emotional level, there's so many other places to go for him, because he's still not a perfect person, and he finally realizes that. So yeah, this run is fantastic. This is one of the best things I've ever read, and I really can't wait to, in a few months, maybe a year, go back and read this all over again and see just how well O'Neil is able to make all of this fit and all of this work. There is an AIM subplot or a side plot at the end between 201 to 208 that isn't great. It doesn't really amount to anything, not thematically, not character-wise. It's just kind of there. And Michelini and Layton's run near the end had the same thing, where it wasn't really about the ongoing character plots anymore, and it just sort of became about action to action, issue to issue. But that's okay. It's the way the comics were written at the time, and that it's still fine. I highly recommend checking this out. I think even if you're not an Iron Man fan, I think this would maybe convert you to that. It's really good. Well, thanks everybody for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments, whether you agree or disagree, and make sure to check the description for a link to my Twitter so you can hear me talk about anything and everything any time of the day. Thanks everybody for listening, and I'll see you next time.